Hi guys, I'm Haze and I'm an artist and speed painter. Today we will be doing a grunge portrait in Procreate, and before we start, I just want to talk about the brushes and the color palette that you'll be seeing in this video. You can download them in the description below. So let's get started. So we'll begin by doing the sketch first, and before we proceed to sketching the features of the face, I like to put in a few grids, which is a circle and also some lines to indicate the jawline. Now we will put in the features on the face and draw the eyes and the nose and the mouth, but sometimes I get them a little too small or too big, but it's okay since I can just select them and resize them according to the grid that I already have. Now that the basics of the features have already been laid in together with the grid, we are going to proceed with confidently sketching all the details of the face. At this point, because I am sketching on another layer, even if I make a mistake, I can still move things around and adjust them or resize them. So now we'll begin the grayscale painting, and I just pick a simple painting brush and I'm trying to pick the value that is the value of the skin. So I feel that the value should be this value, and I'm just laying it down to block in the entire face. So now we'll begin shading the grayscale, and I'm going to use the airbrush because this is a soft brush. I'm going to apply the shading in gradual tonal values. So I'm just going one tone darker than the skin tone, and I'm going to do this as if I'm applying makeup. It's very important to go from tone to tone, so from tone 3 to tone 4 instead of jumping from tone 3 to tone 7, because that might accidentally make your portrait too dark or too light suddenly, and you will lose a lot of realism this way. For the eye socket, I'm just going to paint the entire area darker so that it looks like it's sunken in just like a skull, so we're not going to worry about the eyeballs at the moment. I'm gonna turn the opacity of the sketch layer down so that I can see clearer for my shading areas. And now we're gonna use a darker tone to do the shadows. In this grayscale stage, I try not to use black for the darkest tone. I try to use the tone next to black so that I can still have black to use when I'm doing the color stage if I want to draw focus to any area of the painting. Same goes for the highlights. I never use white. I always use some light gray instead of white, so I always reserve my blacks and whites for final stages for special effects. At this point, I have two layers. One is my sketch layer and the other is my tones. So right now I'm on the sketch layer and I'm cleaning up the lines. I'm using this layer to clean up the lines and to add additional details using the sketch brush. On the sketch layer, I turn the alpha mode on and I change the value of the line by coloring over it with another value that is lighter, so that it's closer to the shading of the skin tone. And I switch back and forth between turning the alpha mode on and off to refine the painting on this sketch layer. I'm going to detail the lips right now, and I'm leaving the highlights and the detailing of the lines to the color stage where I'm doing the effects. Right now I'm just going to do the gradual gradients. An important thing to note about lips is the bottom lip is usually lighter, with the sides almost the same value with the skin tone, and the upper lip is usually a darker value. So bear this in mind, and they don't have outlines surrounding the lips. I'm gonna do the same for the nose and leave the details for last. So right now I'm just gonna do some soft gradients and that's it. You can either use the airbrush to put in values right now, or you can also use the dodge and burn tool. If you're using the dodge tool, pick a very dark gray so that you have a lot more control, and if you are using the burn tool, pick a very light gray so that you have more control. So you can choose to lay in tones as you think are correct, or use the dodge and burn tool to roughly block in the values. When you're working on the eyes, remember that the sclera is not as light as it should be. It's not pure white, so it has some shading in them. It has to look like a sphere within a socket. You should also observe the lower lid, which is the tear line. So this tear line, sometimes it's darker like a shadow, but sometimes it's also like a highlight. When you're working on the upper eyelid, which is the crease of the double eyelid, you have to know that it is not a line of one single value. So on the darker side it would be darker, and then some points it would be actually lighter. So it should also have a gradual tone on the top and bottom of this line, so that it actually looks like a gradient instead of just a line drawing. The important thing is to make the double eyelid looks like it's a 3D form of a bulging skin instead of a flat line and a flat crease. I am just going to shade the iris to have a gradient, soft gradient, so that I can lay on the effects and the details later on in the color stage. For the eyebrows, I'm going to smudge it so that it's soft and blur at the edges. So I don't want any hard edge, because for this portrait I want to have some special effects, and I want to reserve the sharpest lines for the last part of the portrait. For any portrait that you want to experiment with style, you need to do your grayscale in a very blur and soft manner like this, so that after that you can apply all your hard edges and all your effects all you want, especially the glitter. So don't put any textures in this stage. Now I'm back to the value layer, and I'm going to block in the hair with the flat brush. It's a default brush from the Procreate painting brush set. So it's just gonna be a single value. Using the same brush, I'm gonna use black to pull in the darkest parts of the hair. Just a simple blocking with hard edges. And now we're just going to use a smudge tool to smudge all the hair together going in the same direction of all the hair. And once we smudge this, we will move on to the next stage. We have finally reached the coloring stage, and now we're going to color the portrait. So the first thing we're going to do is to merge both layers together, and using the saturation brush tool, we are going to pick a color and apply it to our skin tone in hopes of achieving the correct color. So when it comes to skin tone, there's going to be 3 variants. One is a yellowish tone, and one is an orangey tone, and one is a reddish tone. So for the first layer, we're going to try and guess the skin color, and usually it is an orangey tone. So we always have to start to find the correct orangey tone. So orange can be brownish or darker or light or saturated, so try and find which one is it using the color palette. I feel like I need to repeat something. So for this method to work, you need to be using the saturation brush. That's rule number 1. The second thing is you need to be doing this on the same layer that your sketch and your value is on. So that means everything that you've done so far need to be merged down into one layer, and your saturation brush needs to be applied on this layer. So if you're afraid of making mistakes, you can duplicate your layers. And now I'm going to actively find the correct color for the skin tone. So the only way to do that is to have some sort of color first, just because that we can only assess whether it's correct or not once it's on the painting. So now that I know this is too gray, and this is not the color that I want, and this is too yellow, so we're gonna have to go a lot more saturated. So I'm gonna pick a stronger color, that means still orange but more saturated orange, and I'm gonna be using the saturation brush to change the color of my skin. Once you feel that you have roughly the same color already, you can move on to the next stage by putting in the reds. So the reds would go in the cheeks, the nose, around the eyes, the lips, and the neck. For the sclera of the eye, I would usually use a blue, so a very faded light blue to color back the eyes to white. If you feel that the color you put on is actually correct but it looks a little bit too dark or too light, instead of using the saturation brush, you can use either the burn or dodge brush with the same color, and you can try and use that instead. For the highlights, you can use the same color you use for the sclera, which is a faded powder blue. So now we are going to move on to details, and I'm going to create a new layer. I'm previously duplicated the other layer in case I make any mistakes. And now on this new layer, I'm going to use my pupil brushes to give details to my eyes. So I'm going to put down this brush, resize it, and I'm gonna recolor it. I do this by turning the alpha mode on and changing the colors. Then I'm gonna duplicate it after I change the blending mode to add so that it gives it a bit of a sparkle. Now I'm gonna merge the layer, and I duplicated the layer for the other eye. So now I've merged the effect and I'm erasing parts of the pupils that is sticking out of the eye. I'm going to create another layer, and using the pupil pipe brush, I'm going to put a darker tone this time instead of a lighter one. So same thing again, I'm just going to stamp it, resize it, transform it, then get the intensity I want. Duplicate it for the other eye. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make a new layer duplicated from the original painted layer, and I'm going to use the new brush from my glitter brush set, which is the freestyle highlights brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do all the highlights roughly. I just want to get the color of the highlight, so I'm going to do these highlights for all the face. This is just a reference layer for me to get the colors, and it's not final. So just now the layer that we did the highlights on is turned off already. So back to my original painting layer, I'm going to add all the effects first for the skin texture and freckles before I proceed. Now, using the reference layer, I'm just going to turn it back on and pick the color from the highlights that I did. And once I have the color, I'm going to select an artistic brush that I've downloaded somewhere, or any brush that you can find, to make the highlights a bit more creative and stylized. I continue to do this by picking the colors from the reference layer and putting in the new highlights using a stylized brush for all of the highlights that I've done just now. Once I'm done with the highlights, I'm starting to put down the darker lines, which are the blacks, using the same method, a stylized form of sketching. Then I use the freestyle highlights brush to put on some additional highlights on the face. And I continue to do more stylized sketching to enhance the drawing of the face. For some of the highlights, I think that the effect is too much, so I started erasing them. Now I want to put some more detail into the highlights, so I'm using brightening sparkles and also freestyle highlights to put additional details. Back to the featured highlights freestyle brush, I'm using it to put some white, completely opaque white dots to simulate sparkles and glossiness to the skin. Using the hairbrush, I'm just gonna restate all the values of the hair, starting from the darkest value, which is black. When you're doing hair sketching, you want to make sure that you're going in the direction of the hair and also trying to maintain the entire brush stroke for the length of the hair itself. Using the saturation brush, I'm changing the color of the hair because I feel that it shouldn't be purple. I'm gonna continue putting in highlights using the hairbrush, but this time around I won't be using the exact tonal value. I'll be using something lighter just to exaggerate the contrast a little bit more. To bring it another step further, I'm going to even detail some of the highlights I just did just now and adjust the shape by erasing around it. Now using the featured highlights freestyle brush, I'm going to put down all the sparkles and glitter in her hair. Now using a brush lettering brush, I'm going to do the quotes for the tattoos on her face and body. So for the tattoos, I picked the quote and I used the transform tool to select them and also bring them to the location that I want. I also make sure that the tattoo color is very grey with a slight hint of bluish grey tone, just like a faded tattoo should look like. Then still using the transform tool, I turn them into warp and then I warp it to conform to the skin topology so that it looks like it's actually wrapping on the skin instead of sitting on top of it. I repeat this process for all the tattoos involved. If you need a lot more control for the warp distortion, you can always turn on this advanced mesh shown on the screen here. Then you will be able to control every single point. Now I merge all the tattoos into one layer and duplicate the layer to try and add some color changes and shift, and also to add a Gaussian blur effect because tattoos are usually faded and a bit more smudged into the skin. At this point in time, I have two layers for the tattoo. One is blurred and another one is still sharp, well, just like the one that I initially had, and I'm playing around with the opacity and erasing away certain parts on different layers to give an effect of a more 3D look. Now I'm just putting in minor touch-up sketch lines, glitter to finish up the portrait. And now for the last step, I'm just going to merge all the layers together so that the painting is just one single layer for my final effects. So the last thing that I want to do to this portrait is to add some noise to it, and a little noise goes a long way. We don't want too much, so just a little bit of noise can add a bit of realism to our portrait. So there we go guys, thank you so much for watching, and remember to subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram. I'll see you next time, bye!